Welcome to another literary fireside chat. Today we'll talk about The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Some of you, or your parents, have probably played the lottery, picking a set of numbers, hoping they match the ping pong balls that pop out of that whirly spinning melange of the big drum each Wednesday and Saturday evening. But you wouldn't want to win, or even play, the lottery that Shirley Jackson describes in her 1947 story by that name. The story starts right in on describing the detailed procedures of a small, nameless village's annual lottery, held every June 27th since the very founding of the village, which we deduce is at least 77 years ago, as the currently oldest member of the community has been participating in, but never winning, the lottery for his whole life. While we're not given a specific location, undoubtedly so that we can situate this village as far as our imaginations dare, or as near as our fragile psyches can cope with, the population of 300 villagers and the discussion of farming puts our story in a presumably rural setting. The village and the villagers seem normal enough. Awaiting the commencement of the lottery, they chat idly, if a bit distractedly, about taxes and tractors. The boys ignore their mother's entreaties to behave until sterner fathers issue unmistakable orders, and the girls wait patiently with their mothers. At 10 a.m., a Mr. Summers, organizer of this and other civic events in the village, ceremoniously brings forth a wooden black box filled with small slips of paper, one of which has a large dot drawn in the center. The male heads of households come forward in turn and each take a slip from the box. When all have had their turn, each man opens his paper to see if he has drawn the black dot. The whole family, wife, children, unmarried daughters of the unfortunate winner, each undergo a second round drawing with as many slips as there are family members, one more again with a black dot. The unfortunate family member who draws the black dot this time is summarily stoned to death. Upon completing this otherwise gruesome work, the surviving villagers proceed on to their noon dinner, a 2-hour spectacle, intense and grisly, but willingly entered into by the villagers. The initial publication of the lottery by the New Yorker magazine in 1947 was met with bewilderment, anger, and confusion. Academic observers, like the sociologist Alfred Kruber, complained that Jackson didn't explain where such rituals took place, and by withholding this, she had pulled a fast one on readers. Literary critics, whether they liked it or loathed it, and there were plenty of both, professed to be stumped or have no idea what the story was about. Jackson herself gave a variety of explanations, but the most frequent was that she hoped that by setting a particularly brutal ancient ritual in the present, as she has it in her own village, she might shock readers with a graphic dramatization of the pointless violence and the general inhumanity in their own lives. Man's inhumanity to man is indeed rendered clearly by the narrative's grisly conclusion, and we're compelled to face not only that such violence and inhumanity pervades our lives, but that it emanates from us. We can too easily be the source of such evils. And the 20th century provides ample evidence of this. The first half of that 100 years had already been horrific. The cruelty of Nazi death camps, which relied on participation by everyday low-level bureaucrats, the betrayal of neighbor by neighbor in communist societies, the McCarthy-era conformity, though not violent like the others, morally and philosophically corrosive in the same fashion, were all either still in progress or just recently concluded, and the second half of the century would still see more of the same. Such wanton evil does demand an explanation, though, and Jackson does better at describing than explaining. But she hints that tradition and conformity can be stifling. The eldest villager, for instance, persistently laments the creeping pressure toward change. Rumor has it that the nearby village is going to abandon the lottery. He crowns this expression of frustration with the observation that people ain't what they used to be. In what could seem like an early throwaway scene, Jackson's observation of male-female relational dynamics and maternal authority's weakness compared to paternal might actually reveal another explanation. As a faculty wife in a small college town, Jackson's known to have expressed her frustration about feeling both irrelevant and out of place. It's easy to imagine that in the shifting social and political climate that would ultimately generate an upsurge of activist energy in women around the country, Jackson could have felt trapped or even burdened by the traditional social orderings of her life. Tessie Hutchinson, whom we assume to be Jackson's doppelganger, embodies two important, if seemingly irreconcilable patterns. First, she's the dutiful foundation of domestic structure and goodness, but after winning the lottery and confronted with her own imminent death by stoning, she melts into claims of unfairness at a process she had willingly consented to. And here may be the most disconcerting depiction of the disorientation of this life. Most everybody I know always asks, why does she, or anybody, stay? Why don't they flee? Indeed, we see in her snippets of dialogue and in her reaction that somewhere she knows she ought to go. She ought to have gone long ago, but she hasn't and she doesn't. We can only assume that Tessie, about to become this year's lottery victim, had played her own violent part in last year's lottery proceedings. In other words, we have to face the fact that we are both perpetrator and victim of unpleasant, harsh, and even cruel things. We ought to do something, we know. We ought to act, but we don't, and we can't explain why, and it kills us.